So you mentioned that your grandparents pick wild parsley. How do you like to use it?
Oh yeah, I love it. Every spring, we kind of like round them up, like you know how you have parsley planks or oregano?
Absolutely.
And so we kind of put it on our food. I like to use mine on like mashed potatoes, baked potatoes.
That
so
sounds
good.
so good.
After my interview with my grandparents, I've been thinking a lot about what they shared with me.
Oh wow, really? What kind of questions did you ask them and what did they say?
Well, I read the questions off of my interview template, but I also kept conversational momentum by asking relevant questions based off of what was being shared. For example, my grandmother shared that she would go to her grandmother's house during the summers, and I asked, "What did you do? Did you play outside?" She said, "Yes, we would go to the hills and pick wild parsley and verdolagas." And if I didn't ask that question, I wouldn't know what verdolagas are, or how they were involved in my grandmother's childhood.
Oh wow, Gabby, that's so interesting. It's funny you mentioned wild parsley. Where I come from, we call it shcham. And then the verdolagas, we call it gaitshi, but it's also called purslane. So that's really awesome that you got to understand that from your grandparents, and now we kind of have a similarity too. We used to harvest that as well. How are you able to maintain your engagement in the conversation?
Well, I maintained engagement because I was naturally engaged. Like in our conversation, I really appreciate what you shared with me, and I appreciate what my grandparents shared with me. Everything that they told me drew me further into the conversation. I also actively listened, and when you actively listen, you maintain engagement of all parties and show respect to the speaker.
I agree. That's such good advice. Active listening plays a key role in when you're interviewing. And I understand communication is sending and receiving wordless cues. What did active listening look like in your interview?
Exactly, Victoria. Active listening is exemplified by words, tone, and body language. It can look like smiling and nodding when appropriate, eye contact, and facing the speaker with proper posture. For example, my grandpa asked me if I'd like to learn more about my grandmother's childhood, and I replied enthusiastically with yes, of course I do. Well, another important part of active listening is controlling your inner dialogue.
Inner dialogue? What is inner dialogue?
Well, it's a balance. As an interviewer, I want to be respectful and maintain engagement, but I also need to complete my interview.
That's such good advice, Gabby. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, how did you reflect about your project?
Well, I internalized the information that was shared with me. I now have a greater understanding of my personal history and that of the land and water. In creating my final project, I transcribed the interview and highlighted the stories that were important to me and my goals. I also went through state archives and family photos and found relevant pictures. I then combined the two medias into a final project that I was eager to present.
That's so awesome. It sounds like your project came out very well. That's really exciting. And you've been so resourceful, and I feel like I've picked up a few pointers that I can use during my interview.